I already want to mention that my presentation might provide some overlap with the fair machine learning comments being made in the previous presentation, but I will come to those. So my name is Naudts. I am a doctoral researcher at the KU Leuven Center for IT and IP Law, an interdisciplinary research center located at one of the oldest universities of Europe, and according to Reuters, the most innovative university of Europe. We currently have 40 researchers on staff and 5 professors. And one might consider that, given the multitude of minds present at our research center, there is a variety of research interests and a variety of research domains in which we participate. But nonetheless, and this will be the presentation, we do try to encourage some common themes within our research that I will discuss in this presentation, and I will also show how these themes feed into my own research and my PhD research. So, and of course, these unified research teams, or how you might call them, these are not sacred. We still encourage own innovation from our students and our researchers, but nevertheless, these allow some other ways to reflect on the relationship between technology, law, and ethics. And one lens through which we aim to investigate this relationship is through the change in dimensions between individuals and collectives as a result of interaction with technology, and a multidirectional relationship that exists between individuals towards a collective and vice versa. Perhaps this is best exemplified with a practice such as machine learning and profiling. While we interact with our online environment, we might often perceive ourselves as an individual actor, for instance, when we get recommendations by Amazon on books. But of course, these recommendations are based on an aggregate of data, and they do not approximate my individuality in a distributive way. There are differences between how a machine perceives me and how I am as an individual. There is a generalization taking place, and of course, a generalization to a certain extent refers to a collective of individuals that a machine might perceive as being similar to me. So when I participate as an individual, I also partake in a larger collective, and my role is not necessarily passive because I feed information to that collective, and at the same time that collective of information feeds back power towards me or has a sort of effect on me. So the lens of individual collectives allows to somehow investigate the role and the function we have in relation to technologies. Similarly, it also allows us to examine different structures that arise. For instance, when we talk about profiling and aggregate data, these are not formal structures as we might be used to within society, but rather they are informal. One can also think of social media networks and social media structures. We are tied together with persons based on traits that we might not necessarily know we have in common, but nonetheless we operate in the same sort of ecosystem. And also, this prism of the collective and the individual might also enable us to break through the sometimes static dichotomy that exists between the public and private. And this is an underlying research theme as well, is that we try to consider the blurring boundaries between private and public on multiple levels, interests, spheres, and the law. Of course, public-private law is a summa divisio. And here you might think of a power like Facebook, that was meant as a network to create a relationship between private individuals, but of course it gathers data as well and might by some be assumed as a power similar to that of a government, while at the same time it enters public discourse and our democratic values by also affecting the political information that we receive. And these themes we apply on both a applied level in the form of interdisciplinary research projects, international and national, as well as fundamental research in a variety of domains ranging from data protection to media and communications. For instance, in my case, I am currently working on a Horizon 2020 project in the security and law enforcement domain called Victoria, where I provide legal and ethical guidance on video analysis for terrorist and criminal activities. And we also do interdisciplinary research, for instance, at this point, regarding the right to an explanation and algorithmic transparency, where these ideas also play a role. Now, when I consider my own research, it might fit in more into the category of the collective individual dimension, because my research kind of borders around the impact of artificial intelligence and machine learning and algorithmically guided decision making. And my main problem is these systems inherently differentiate between individuals and groups of individuals, but oftentimes it is very difficult to determine when we should consider these distinctions that are made as fair or unfair. Now, the example was given in the previous presentation of a bank with regards to a loan, or you might think of a corporation in a hiring scheme. Having all this data available to us, oftentimes the main instinct would be, let's look at the data and learn from data in order to make or enhance our decision making. And here you see that even on a technical level, if you visualize it quite abstractly on how learning practices might function, that the distinction on a technical level will be made. And of course, you can make a distinction on a technical machine learning level. Then you also have to apply it in practice vis-à-vis individuals, or often vis-à-vis individuals. And as said, for instance, if you say a bank will determine a credit on the basis of, for instance, criteria such as wage or age, you create a range of age and a range of wage. Then you have distinctions created within society, generalizations of whether you think that category will be able to repay its loan or not, whether you should put the grant of a loan on hold or whether you should deny the loan. And then it wonders, is a criteria such as wage and age, is this fair to distinguish among these different outcomes? And you can see this on a collective level, the category as such, but also on an individual level, because the individual is part of that collective, part of that group, and he might want to be treated differently from other people within the group. So for me, my approach was to look at equality as a principle of justice, because on a formal level, it's quite moldable. If we look at the formal Aristotelian notion of treat like situations alike, different situations differently, might be morally empty, but there are a lot of interpretations out there within political philosophy on how to give it more substance. And this is what I'm currently doing. Perhaps I should also look at more theories outside the scope of liberal democracy, though the capability approach might fit into that mold. And there you try to derive from these theories different criteria to determine what might be unfair or a fair form of differentiation. For instance, luck equality might consider volition and chance as means to determine this, whereas substantive non-discrimination law might look at protected grounds, such as ethnicity and gender, in relationship to a specific context, such as employment or education. And we filter out these criteria and then try to see whether you can apply them onto the algorithmic environment. And then at a later stage, also see whether there are connecting points with data protection to look at legal instruments to mitigate those unfair inequalities. Now, one of the issues that I'm currently investigating, or that I stumbled upon while investigating fairness in machine learning, is the current debate regarding the formalization of fairness. So it's the methodical or formal embedding of a fairness notion into the design of a learning process in order so that the outcome or procedure of that process corresponds to what a priori has been defined as fair or unfair. And what you know, or what I notice as potentially problematic, is that it has a kind of static view of reality as is. And it focuses also on a quite limited vision on what fairness entails. Because it often, and there's not necessarily a wrong in that, on current injustices within society, and more specifically focusing on specific grounds found in non-discrimination law, such as gender and ethnicity. But what you should also take into account, in my opinion, when you try to articulate fairness, is the contextual changes technology brings about when it interacts with its environment. These collectives are not always tangible. They might be proxies for protected grounds, but they can become dissociated from those protected grounds as they capture more people than the attributes they infer about individuals. So, in that sense, we also need to think about how environments change over time, and we should think about fairness accordingly. And of course, this is difficult, but this is also a call towards future research on how we go about this, and on how we can articulate fairness in the sense that it entails an active reflection on the potential impact of machine learning technologies on individuals, groups of individuals, and society as a whole over time. Thank you very much.